300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Glad you could join me on a jam-packed Monday morning. Wow, a lot of news starting to reverberate in the college football world. Lincoln Riley going to USC. I'm going to touch on that. Michigan and Jim Harbaugh finally beating Ohio State. I'm going to touch on the significance of that win. And even from the NFL, some major headlines and some major results, going to unpack all of that. But I have to start with one of the marquee games. In fact, it was surprising that it was a 10 a.m. start. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Indianapolis Colts, 2 teams that were kind of trending in the wrong direction, or the opposite directions, rather. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers came back to beat the Colts on the road at Lucas Oil Field, 38-31. To me, this was probably the most impressive win of the Buccaneers season, especially if you date back to the season opener against the Dallas Cowboys when they won an opening night of the NFL season. This was arguably their best win of the year, because this was a team in Tampa Bay that was starting to trend in the wrong direction. They had lost their final game entering the bye week. They lost their first game coming out of the bye week. And this was an important test for them because they really hadn't collected any marquee wins, again, since that Dallas Cowboys game. Obviously, the game against the New England Patriots, it's aging well, given what we're seeing from New England. But really, this was a statement victory against, I would argue, one of the top 2 or 3 hottest teams in the NFL. The Indianapolis Colts had won 5 of their last 6 games. They were really streaking in the right direction, and everything changed in the second half. The first half absolutely was dominated by the Indianapolis Colts. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers still looked a little bit sluggish. They seemed to be one of those teams kind of traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast, having to play in an early morning slate. Obviously, they were a little bit rusty perhaps, though why that was the case, I'm not sure. But the Indianapolis Colts dominated the first 30 minutes of this game. And in the second half, especially in the third quarter, that's when the tone shifted. Because the defense forces a fumble on Carson Wentz. They turn it into points, into a touchdown. Then Antoine Winfield picks off Carson Wentz, turns it into a long drive that the Buccaneers end up punching in to score a touchdown. And they outscore the Colts 14-0 in that third quarter. And that was really the change in the game, was the entire momentum, the entire pace of play shifted in the direction of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But this is the interesting thing about the Buccaneers. And this is actually selfishly a big reason why I picked the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense on my fantasy team. But this is why their defense has been so heralded. This isn't a defense that is going to lock you down, put you into handcuffs, and render your offense completely futile and unproductive. That's not what's made the Tampa Bay Buccaneers so feared. They've been misunderstood the entire time. The Buccaneers defense has been misunderstood. This isn't a team that's necessarily going to hold you to the fewest points in the NFL, but what they are going to do is be very opportunistic and dynastic defensively. They create and wreak havoc. They're flying all over the field. They force turnovers. They had 5 turnovers. They forced 5 turnovers yesterday. 2 picks, 3 fumbles, multiple sacks on Carson Wentz. That's what you need to be doing if you're an elite level defense. That's what's made the Tampa Bay Buccaneers who they are. 14 interceptions on the year. They have forced 23 turnovers on the season, which is top 5 in the NFL. So we've kind of been misunderstanding what this defense is supposed to be. This isn't a team that's going to hold opponents to 10 points or less. They're going to give up yards in the middle and big chunk plays in the middle of the field. But when they have to make a play, create an interception, create a turnover, that's what they're capable of doing. And that was the difference in this game, was their defense started to step up and the Bucs trusted their run game. Leonard Fournette torched the Colts for 100 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. They trusted the run game. It's like the Indianapolis Colts had completely forgotten about Jonathan Taylor till it was too late. That 185 rushing yard, 5 touchdown performance last week against the Buffalo Bills seemed to have been wiped clean from their memory by the time they turned to Jonathan Taylor in the fourth quarter, who was productive in the fourth quarter. It was too late. They orchestrated a great drive, but they gave Tom Brady too much time on his hands, and they didn't allow Jonathan Taylor to wear down this Buccaneers defense, even though they were going up against a stout defensive team, especially against the run in the Buccaneers. So that was the big difference. The defense was opportunistic. They trusted the run game more than the Indianapolis Colts. And again, in that third quarter, that's where everything kind of unraveled and got away from the Colts. They had this game in the bag, and I actually thought that through the first 30 minutes in the first half and in the fourth quarter, if you omit the third quarter, which I realize is a big chunk of time in an NFL game, but if you omit that third quarter, I thought Carson Wentz played his best game of the year. I thought he was looking the most impressive that he's looked since under Frank Reich in Philadelphia in 2017 during his MVP candidate season before he tore his ACL. This was a guy who, entering this contest yesterday, had 18 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions. Obviously, when he was an MVP front runner, he had 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, so he was committing few turnovers. And again, prior to that third quarter, he was on just a feverish pace, 21 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions. He was standing in the pocket. He was delivering third down throws. He was making big-time plays. He wasn't turning the ball over. He was careful with the football. And I just thought that he played the most calm and collected and poised that he had looked really this whole year. I mean, yes, he's had some good performances this year against the Jets and a couple other teams, a couple other bottom feeders, but this was, when you factor in the level of competition, again, it was heading in the direction like Carson Wentz was about to have the best game of the season for him. Then that third quarter, again, things spiraled out of control. And he committed 2 turnovers, and it led to 2 touchdowns for the Buccaneers. And unfortunately, again, I love the Indianapolis Colts. I've been bullish about them the entire year. They're streaking in the right direction. I like that I'm starting to see their defense emerge even more. Kwity Paye, the defensive end out of Michigan, there was a reason why he was projected to be the best defensive player in the draft this year, because he's 6'3" and 260 pounds and had tremendous upside. The only reason why he fell a little bit so that the Colts could draft him was because of a potential, because of an injury that he had sustained. So he was recovering from that. But obviously, DeForest Buckner is huge. Darius Leonard. This entire defense came up with a couple big stops when they had to for about 56 minutes. And then the final drive, obviously, Brady does what Brady does, and he orchestrates a game-winning drive. But I thought that this was just an important win for, again, a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that statistically, when they had exited when they were coming off of the bye week last year, they didn't lose a game. They were 8-0 after the bye week last year. That's what propelled them to their Super Bowl run. And they had come out of the gates a little bit sluggish this time around. And now, hopefully, they might be clicking at the right time because they're going to need to. And this was a major first step in that direction. And speaking of a big-time win heading in the right direction, the Green Bay Packers are rolling right now, 9-3. They just dominated once again the LA Rams 36-28 in what was essentially a rematch of the divisional round from last year's postseason. And let me start with the Rams, not just because they're from LA and that's my LA team, but something has been a bit concerning for the LA Rams, and that's the turnovers right now, because I'm going to compliment the Green Bay Packers, and I think that the Green Bay Packers are the best team in football. So I'll put that out there, that I think they're the best team in football right now. So it's no shame to lose at Lambeau Field, but the turnovers and the costly penalties are just continuing to just make life a lot more treacherous and difficult for an LA Rams team that just continues to inflict a lot of kind of self-inflicted wounds. That's been the problem for the LA Rams. They've now lost 3 straight games, and there's been a similar theme in all 3 games: turnovers and lack of defense. And that's what we saw yesterday. They had a really difficult time slowing down Aaron Rodgers and this offense. And for the 3rd straight week, they just committed a lot of turnovers. Matthew Stafford fumbled it on the first possession, gave the ball to the Packers inside their own red zone. Then you had another muffed punt that was recovered, special teams gaff, recovered by the Packers, sets up some more points. You just can't do that. And then just even actual penalties. It's 4th and 4, and the Packers are going to punt it away. And the Rams are called for a neutral zone infraction, and they automatically give the Packers a first down. Things like this, roughing the passer, when you have the Packers offense off the field. It's just silly mental errors and mistakes that you continue, that you, the LA Rams, continue to commit. And you combine that with the fact that their offense has been sputtering. And yes, I like Darrell Henderson, but he's not the most explosive running back. He's a downhill back, which I like, but we're really starting to see the effects of Cam Akers not being with this team. And we're, more importantly, really starting to see the effects of Robert Woods after he tore his ACL. This offense hasn't looked the same. He provides a different element, a different threat, both in the seam, up the seams and downfield. His route running is exceptional, and we're not seeing that. And unfortunately, it's leading to Matthew Stafford kind of unraveling right now. And I'm not saying that Matthew Stafford has been playing awful, but he hasn't been playing great. And don't be confused by the stats. Unfortunately, the stats don't paint the full picture for Matthew Stafford. He did not look good yesterday. Even on passes that he connected on, many of them were underthrown, or there were misplaced balls that happened to be caught. Now, obviously, he didn't get a whole lot of help from all of his receivers, who dropped a couple. Guys like Van Jefferson, who I like, the second-year pro out of Florida. He made a couple sensational grabs, but also had a couple perplexing drops where you're saying, just 1 minute ago, you made an exceptional catch, and now a couple series later, you're dropping balls that hit you squarely in the helmet and in the forehead. So that's been the problem. And again, Matthew Stafford just needs to kind of regain his focus. No one is claiming that he's worse than Jared Goff, or that Jared Goff would be better for the Rams. No, Matthew Stafford is still an upgrade, is still the better option. But he's thrown a pick 6 now in 3 straight games, which is, I believe, the second longest streak since Matt Schwab did it in like the early 2000s, maybe the early 2010s. 3 straight games with a pick 6, only been done like 2 other times. So that's a problem. And he's thrown 5 interceptions in as many games, in 3 games. So you can't do that, especially not on the road. And that's been the problem, is the Rams, they can flex on teams that they're better than. They're 6-0 against teams above 500. The problem is when they play against teams that are just as good or are better, they're 1-4 against teams with an above 500 record. Their only win coming against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And you certainly don't want to question the validity of that win, but you do wonder, well, was that perhaps an anomaly and an aberration given how they've looked over the last couple weeks? So And then again, the third quarter off the punt, some kind of rookie kid who hasn't been playing at all gets the nod to receive the punt, and he muffs it. I actually didn't even think Sean McVay called a great game yesterday. There were certain moments of the game where I was looking at Sean McVay and I was saying, what's up with the play calling? When they were down by 11 points late in the game in the fourth quarter, he decided to run it with a minute left and waste away another 40 seconds as opposed to just throw a pass to set up a field goal. I'm not sure what the play call was there. That's kind of bizarre. So, again, just so many costly penalties. Von Miller roughing the passer on Aaron Rodgers multiple times. You just can't do that against the good teams, and especially on the road. And that's what we're seeing is the Rams are a good team, but they're a great team at home. They're a good team on the road, and that's a problem. Their defense is supposed to travel. It hasn't so far. They only had about 3 QB hits, a couple pressures on Aaron Rodgers. They didn't really get to him too much. And again, I said after last year's playoff loss 32-18 to the Packers that it seemed like the Rams were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotels last time they played these guys. And to be honest, it almost felt like at times that's what we're thinking about again, because it was freezing over at Lambeau Field in Wisconsin in mid-30s. And obviously when that sun sets, it feels even chillier. But listen, if this game is played at SoFi, maybe it's a different result. But if these two teams play again at Lambeau Field, I fear the result would be the same. And again, I said this at the top of the segment that I think that the Green Bay Packers are the best team in football. I think they're the most complete team right now. And I thought that they had collected 2 statement wins. I'm willing to overlook the Vikings loss. I'm willing to overlook that. I just think in-division rivalry, Mike Zimmerman, Kirk Cousins, their season was on the line. The Packers were in town. They played up. They played up to their opponents. They played one of their best games of the year. But Aaron Rodgers and the connection and the chemistry that he has with Devontae Adams, it's like they've mastered the telepathic communication. They're just on a different wavelength. And they just understand where they each like for one another to be or be thrown the ball. And it still amazes me how the Bucs went to Lambeau Field last year and won there to win the NFC Championship game, because I just think now that you have Zadarius Smith and Jair Alexander coming back after the bye week to an already loaded defense that's been playing really well, and they still don't even have David Bakhtiari, who I think should be coming back. He's one of the best left tackles in the game. So this Packers team is really loaded. They are a really, really good and legitimate team at 9-3. And again, when I saw them win on the road at Arizona and even the loss against Kansas City on the road, those were 2 statement games to me that validated in my mind, oh, they're back. No, the Packers are back once again. And if they have Lambeau Field, again, Aaron Jones is recovering. A.J. Dillon's a powerful running back. He can make some noise. So this Packers team will be a force once again in the NFC at 9-3. They will be. So finally, there's one other team that surprisingly has been a force in the NFL, and that's the New England Patriots, who have now won incredibly 6 straight games. Inexplicably, they have not lost since the middle of October. And really, the last time they lost was to the Cowboys in overtime, 35-29, a game that they easily could have won. And had they won that game, they wouldn't have lost since the beginning of October, on October 3rd, when they faced Tampa Bay and the Buccaneers. That would have been 8 straight games that the Patriots would have won. But now it's obviously at 6. But this was one of those kind of NFL games in the week that I wanted to keep a close eye on, because I thought that this was a really important game for New England and the Patriots. Obviously, I'll touch on the bevy of injuries sustained by the Tennessee Titans. Obviously, they were without Derrick Henry, Julio Jones, A.J. Brown, those guys didn't play. I understand that. But this was about the New England Patriots and an opportunity on a silver platter in front of them to once again make a statement and shock the NFL world once again. Because I think that context is so important when we analyze different football games. And the reality is the last time that the Tennessee Titans and the New England Patriots played, we all remember it. It was in 2019. It was in the divisional round of the AFC playoffs. New England was a 3 seed. They had to host the Tennessee Titans in the first round, and the Titans just bullied them around to a 20-13 victory and ostensibly knocked Tom Brady out of New England. That ended up being the final game that he would play as a New England Patriot before he set sail for Tampa Bay. And Bill Belichick and the Patriots had been 0-2 against the Tennessee Titans since former Patriots linebacker Mike Vrabel was named the head coach in 2018. So you have all this context as the backdrop, setting in motion this third matchup between these two teams. And both of them had some of the best records in the AFC and in the NFL. Titans had the best record in the NFL. And I think what we saw is even without Derrick Henry, they were capable of winning. Now, obviously, they've looked poor the last couple of weeks. They haven't played that well. And it was inclement weather. It was snowy weather. But the Patriots just flexed on the entire NFL and on the Tennessee Titans, and especially Bill Belichick. We've seen his greatness on display, especially as a defensive strategist, what he's been able to concoct and draw up as far as game plans defensively. This guy is an absolute brilliant mind. And especially on the defensive side, the defense forced 4 turnovers, an interception, and 3 fumbles. I mean, what's impressive, excuse me, wow, I got so worked up about the Patriots topic that I had to sneeze. Apologies. What the big question mark surrounding the New England Patriots was in the narrative about Bill Belichick, about Tom Brady. And obviously Tom Brady put to bed the notion that he needed Bill Belichick to win a Super Bowl and to win by winning with the Buccaneers last year. Well, Bill Belichick hadn't yet proven that he can win a Super Bowl. Now, listen, I'm not going to predict that he's going to win a Super Bowl post Tom Brady, but I can definitively say that he can lead a team to the postseason without Tom Brady, because the job that he's been doing this year, I think that a strong argument can be made. Now, obviously, Cliff Kingsbury could be in the mix, but I think that Bill Belichick should be one of the leading candidates for NFL Coach of the Year. The job that he's done with this team, the offseason acquisitions that he's made, the development of Mac Jones, the development of this defense is remarkable. What he continues to pull off time and time again. And again, all this onus shifted onto Belichick entering this year. And so far, love him or hate him, this guy's just a phenomenal coach. And he just has a way, not only against Tannehill, but he limited a Tennessee Titans team to 13 points. Again, 4 turnovers, multiple sacks. Tannehill, he held in check to 93 passing yards. That's it, 93 passing yards. I mean, it's just unbelievable that the Patriots, you look up and they've got second best record in the AFC, or they're just half a game back of the, they have the second best record in the AFC at 8-4. They got 2 games coming up against the Buffalo Bills over the next 3 weeks. Everything's in front of them. Everything is in front of them right now to just go take it, to just go take that division and to capture a playoff spot. And I think right now that they will. Yeah, that's just the team that they look like. And they're probably the hottest team in the NFL. Winners of 6 straight games. No other team in the NFL has a streak quite like that. They really don't. Okay. So I want to transition to the NFL I want to transition to college football in a move that I think shocked everyone yesterday. Just a bombshell of a notification that Lincoln Riley is leaving Oklahoma to become the next head coach at USC. Somehow the Trojans found a way to get it done, and they wooed and they whisked Lincoln Riley away from Oklahoma, and they announced it yesterday. With the regular season obviously over, Oklahoma lost to Oklahoma State, pretty much knocking their college football playoff hopes out of contention. This announcement was made. And this is groundbreaking news in college football, because this is a guy in Lincoln Riley who had just wrapped up 5 seasons at Oklahoma. Obviously, he still had a bowl game left to play, but he wrapped up 5 seasons at Oklahoma in which he had a 55-10 record, 37-7 in the Big 12. This is a guy that has never lost more than 2 games in a year at Oklahoma. He was the succession plan to Bob Stoops. He took over as a successor in 2017. And he's really carried the mantle at just 38 years of age. This is a guy that won 10 that was 10-2 in his first 3 years, including 3 straight trips to the college football playoff. And then followed it up with a 9-2 season. And now this year he's 10-2. And not to mention he's won the Big 12 championship 4 times. So he was actually not 10-2. He was 12-2, 12-2, 12-2, then 9-2, and now this year 10-2. So I don't think, first of all, that anyone thought that this was actually a possibility. I certainly didn't, but obviously a move like this doesn't happen overnight. The wheels were put in motion probably months ago, likely right after Clay Helton was fired as the head coach. I'm sure they probably had some kind of discreet contact with and covert contact with his agent. Now, it didn't seem like Oklahoma necessarily was blindsided by the move, given how they've reacted. Not going to delve into that, but I will say that this is shocking on a number of reasons, because this is a guy in Lincoln Riley who clearly just was like stolen by a thief in the middle of the night. Yeah, just somehow wooed and whisked away by the Southern California breeze, by the aura surrounding USC and their brand. And there were always rumors throughout the year about Lincoln Riley potentially to USC, potentially to LSU. He publicly shut those down, or at least publicly dismissed the USC or the LSU head coaching rumors. I guess he didn't technically shut down the USC rumors at all. But what this says is it's not a financial issue. This was not a financial-driven reason to leave for Lincoln Riley, because he's making $6.5 million this year, and I'm sure that Oklahoma would have been willing to pay him whatever it is that USC was willing to pay him. This is about USC and the fact that they were willing to say, hey, you know what? The boosters were impatient. They were intolerant of mediocrity and losing. And they said, hey, Mike Bone, we need you to convince Lincoln Riley to come here, and we'll support you and we'll back you by whatever financial means necessary to get the job done. It all came down to the boosters. Mike Bone approached the boosters likely, or the boosters approached him and said, hey, listen, I think I can get Lincoln Riley. Do I have the financial support from you guys? The answer is obviously yes. And this is a guy in Lincoln Riley who, again, has just been an offensive guru, an offensive wizard, has always had one of the top offenses in college football. He, of course, was a student assistant. He was a former quarterback at Texas Tech. Actually was the 3rd string, funny enough, to Cliff Kingsbury, who's now is apparently the next target for a potential head coach for Oklahoma, because he's got 1 more year remaining on his contract with the Arizona Cardinals. Now, I doubt he's going to leave the Cardinals right now, but that's a different point and a different discussion. But after Texas Tech, he was a student assistant under Mike Leach for a couple years. So obviously the background and the offensive background of Mike Leach has rubbed off on him. He was an offensive coordinator at East Carolina, then an offensive coordinator under Bob Stoops for several years. So he has this kind of moniker as the quarterback whisperer and a quarterback extraordinaire. That he has a way with making them play a lot bigger and just look a lot better than perhaps they were. Especially Jalen Hurts, we saw how he erupted under this guy's tutelage. But this is a huge, huge win for USC and their program, because this is not only a young but elite quarterback coach, an elite head coach, an elite recruiter in college football, and a genius offensively. This is an electric and a flashy signing, but it works. And now you have an opportunity in Lincoln Riley to once again reestablish the nobility and kind of resuscitate a once prestigious college football brand in USC. And it will allow him to establish a footprint in Southern California as it relates to recruiting, because USC is a sleeping giant when it comes to recruiting. They've got an entire coast practically to themselves that's untapped right now. UCLA hasn't been able to dominate. Right now it's been Oregon that's been dominating the Southern California recruiting trails, along with other schools, of course, that have been kind of infringing and encroaching on that territory, Alabama, Clemson. But this is a big name coach, and that's the big thing is, okay, you had John McKay, John Robinson, Pete Carroll, and USC was quite frankly done with the low-profile names. I know that Dave Aranda was thrown out, the head coach at Baylor, even though he was only there for 1 year. USC has been there and done that with the low-profile guys. They did it with Clay Helton. They've done it with unproven head coaching commodities in Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian. And the bottom line is, they said, if we're not going to dip our toes into the NFL waters, then if we're going to stick to college football, we're going to have to attract and get a big-time college football name. And Lincoln Riley is about as big as they come as it relates to I guess, head coaches that were potentially on the market. He's about as big as it comes. And he's going to do wonders for this USC program to resuscitate them. And not only, again, will he be able to establish a recruiting footprint in the region, but it's just going to be a nightmare now for other schools in the Pac-12 to be able to compete, I think, with USC. I mean, I think that Oregon has done a really nice job carving out a niche for them. But again, we just know that we knew that the boosters were not just going to sit around at USC and say, okay, they're going to accept this abysmal season and really this mediocrity for several years. That just wasn't going to happen, because they've kind of looked deplorable at stretches during this year. Obviously got shellacked by UCLA, which selfishly I was happy to see. And they're going to make him probably the highest paid college football coach in the nation, if not the highest paid, a top 3 college football coach when it comes to salary. So, but again, financially, I don't think that was the reason behind Lincoln Riley's decision to leave. It was likely just, hey, this is a new opportunity to embark on a new challenge with a program that, quite frankly, probably has a slightly richer history than Oklahoma, which is really hard to do. Oklahoma is a prestigious program, and I might get pushback on that last statement. It could be Oklahoma's a bigger program. I'm not sure. Maybe they're about even when it comes to kind of the brand awareness for both of those two programs in football. I mean, this is a huge, huge deal for USC and for college football. I don't think people understand, and it's surprising, especially given the fact that Oklahoma is projected to move to the SEC, so you thought maybe that would be an enticing piece. But, wow. Lincoln Riley to USC, we did not see that one coming. Clearly didn't just happen overnight, but wow, just blindsided. And his entire staff is coming to USC with him. Entire staff is coming to USC with him. They're going to establish another powerhouse at USC. Major coup for the Trojans. Wow. Okay. Final topic before my Malkins moments. There's one other college football game that I wanted to talk about. Now, nothing disgusts me more than to talk about teams that I absolutely despise and that I detest. USC, who I just had to talk about and compliment because I'm a UCLA guy, and Michigan and Ohio State because I went to Wisconsin, and historically, we have had a lot of shortcomings against those two programs athletically, purely from an athletic standpoint. I hate those schools. But I'd be remiss in my duties as an honorable sports broadcaster if I didn't discuss the game and this edition of the game that was absolutely significant for the University of Michigan, for Jim Harbaugh, and for college football. Because as much as I may loathe those two programs, it doesn't compare to the disdain that those two programs have for one another. And obviously, ever since Jim Harbaugh was hired as the new coach of Michigan, the discussion from day one, would he be able to finally beat Ohio State? That was the discussion from day one. And up until this weekend, he was 0-5. In fact, he was 3-4 against Michigan State, which is all that people were clamoring about and arguing about. Wow, he can't beat his rivals. Yada, yada, yada. He was 3-9 against Michigan State and Ohio State entering this weekend. Fans, alumni, the boosters, no one cared about the fact that this guy had a consistent winning record in Michigan. All they cared about was, could they beat this one opponent? And this is a rivalry that dates back to 1897. In fact, they had played continuously from 1918 to 2020, uninterrupted. Every year. Last year was the first exception because of COVID, and they had to cancel the game. But Jim Harbaugh was absolutely lambasted. His name was dragged through the mud, ridiculed, just crushed for his inability to win this one game. And I've always been of the mindset that I never thought that Jim Harbaugh was a failure at Michigan. I never thought that he wasn't living up to expectations. My thought process was Michigan is a program that obviously has a lot of respect, but they kind of have an inflated perception of what their program is and what the expectations of their programs, of their athletic programs, should be. That's the reality. So the error has been on their inflated view of themselves. That's been the problem with Michigan. And I thought that since day one, he's come in and he's revitalized a program that was kind of decaying, and he nourished it back to life. And he brought it back through his flair. And yes, he is pretentious. Yes, he is odd and he's quirky. Yes, he goes on extravagant and a bit gratuitous off-season trips and escapades with recruits and with his teammates to try and inspire them for the upcoming season. Yes, I know all of that is true. But the reality is the job that he had been doing was incredible at Michigan. He made them relevant. Once again, he returned them to relevancy, which I think, as hard as it was for Michigan fans to accept and appreciate, that was the reality. That's what he did. And the fact of the matter is, even though Michigan was paying Jim Harbaugh all this money, and even though he ended up reworking and reconstructing his deal. I always thought it was a bit unrealistic and a bit unfair, to be honest, and unreasonable to expect Michigan in today's era to have beaten Ohio State because they didn't have as much talent. Even this year, you can argue that Ohio State has always had more talent in the last 2 decades than Michigan. And so their recruits have been better. Their recruiting class has been better. And in today's era, it was harder, in my opinion, to argue that Michigan is a richer football program than Ohio State. I know historically that is the case. I know historically Michigan holds a 59 to 51-6 advantage over Ohio State, and they've won 11 national titles as opposed to just 8 for Ohio State. But most of those titles for Michigan came in like in the first decade of the 1900s, and then sprinkled in there in the 50s, in the 70s, and in the 80s. If you look at the 2000s, because 1997 was the last time that Michigan won the national title, that was the year that I was born, 24 years ago, nearly 25 years ago. And I'm not going to necessarily claim that I'm a sports historian, though I'm trying to be, but that's a long time. That's a long time. In the 2000s, Ohio State has won 2 national titles. They have won 11 Big Ten championships. They've reached the college football playoff 4 times. And of those 10 or 11 Big Ten championships, in 2011 is when the Big Ten actually created divisions in that conference. Ohio State had won the Big Ten division 10 years. And in 2014, when they divided the divisions into 2 geographical divisions, the East Division and the West Division, Ohio State entering this year had won the Big Ten East Division 7 years in a row. And in fact, they were 17-3 against Michigan over the last 20 meetings this century. So the argument was clearly in the favor of Ohio State for recruits. Recent history at least, was always in favor of Ohio State against Michigan when it came to recruiting. So it was always mind-boggling to me how disappointed fans and media experts would be when Michigan didn't have as much talent as Ohio State, despite the fact that the athletic department was paying him a boatload of money. Yeah, that's going to happen. That's going to happen, but that's the only way to turn around a struggling program to relevancy. And I thought that Jim Harbaugh had done that. And you look at his record, again, 10-3 in 2015, 10-3 in 2016. He was 8-5 in 2017. Okay, fine. 10-3 again in 2018, 9-4 in 2019. Last year was an aberration, and he's 11-1 in this year. And if you really analyze the matchups against Ohio State, there were only 2 times other than this weekend where you could say they probably should have won. In 2016, that was one of the best college football games that I've seen. Ohio State was number 2. Michigan was number 3 in his second season as the head coach at Michigan. They played on the road in Columbus at the Shoe, and that was a game that Ohio State somehow, by hook or by crook, pulled out a 30-27 double overtime win, a game that featured perhaps one of the worst spotted calls that we've ever seen by refs. On a 4th and 1, the refs gave JT Barrett the first down when clearly he was a little bit short of the line to gain. So that would have been Jim Harbaugh's first victory as a head coach. Again, I can't believe I'm having to argue on behalf of this guy. I'm a Wisconsin fan. I hate both of these damn schools, but that's the reality of the situation. Is he's been improperly maligned, in my opinion. So that's 2016, a year that he should have won. Collected his first victory against Ohio State. The only other year where you could argue maybe Michigan had more talent was in 2018, when it was the first year Jim Harbaugh had Shea Patterson as his heralded transfer quarterback from Ole Miss. When they were ranked number 4, they went to the Shoe again. Ohio State was ranked number 10. And Michigan's defense was spectacular. That was a defense that featured Devin Bush, Rashawn Gary, Chase Winovich, Kalike Hudson. A stout defense. Their secondary was phenomenal, and they got the doors blown off them 62. They got boat race 62-39. Okay, maybe that's the one year where in the 6 previous matchups you're saying to yourself, Michigan probably was the better team that year, and they came up short. But Jim Harbaugh's been knocking on the college football playoff door for years, and this was the first time since he's been the head coach against Ohio State where we saw that Michigan was the much more physical team. They dominated up front. Defensively, their defensive line, and offensively, their offensive line, they dominated the line to scrimmage. They controlled the ball. They ran the ball down the throat of Ohio State with the ground and pound game. Hassan Haskins, 165 rushing yards. Michigan as a team rushed for 297 rushing yards. 297 rushing yards against Ohio State. They just bullied them. They just beat them down. They wore them down, which was something that we had yet to see from Michigan against Ohio State. And that's what's allowed them to succeed this year. It hasn't been the passing game. It hasn't been the quarterback play. Cade McNamara is not anything special, but he's done just enough. He's made a couple big throws, and they've been riding the backs of Haskins, who's been carrying them throughout this season. He's rushed for over 150 yards in 3 of his last 4 games. So that's been the difference. And this was the first time in this rivalry since Jim Harbaugh has been the head coach in this rivalry where we saw Michigan exert their will on Ohio State. That had never been the case before. Aiden Hutchinson, 3 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, was a menace defensively. He actually played in that 2018 loss to Ohio State, so he's very familiar with the rivalry. And I just think that for the magnitude of the program and of college football, this is huge because I think that when the next college football playoff rankings come out, Michigan is going to be ranked number 2. They're probably going to leapfrog Alabama and Cincinnati. And Jim Harbaugh deserves a lot of credit. He deserves a lot of credit because this was a year that, again, he pulled off the upset 42-27. There were some doubts as to whether or not he could actually get the job done. If not this year, then when? If not now, when? It was snowing. It was inclement weather. Ann Arbor was rocking. It was a great atmosphere and a great time for a victory. Now, all of that, of course, will be for naught if they can't reach the college football playoff, if they lose to Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. I'm sure that opponents are going to have snarky remarks for him if he loses to Iowa and totally discount the win against Ohio State, but we'll cross that bridge when it happens. But a major, major win for Michigan, major win for Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines. Huge, huge victory against Ohio State. Okay, finally, my final topic, Malkin's moments. Have some great Malkin's moments for you. Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. Did you see that game? Cincinnati torched, absolutely destroyed the Pittsburgh Steelers 41-10. He had 165 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns, all in the first 3 quarters. He didn't even play in the fourth quarter, did Joe Mixon, and he absolutely was dazzling in the win yesterday. He has 923 rushing yards on the season, which is top 5 in the NFL. It was his second consecutive game with over 100 rushing yards. And the Cincinnati Bengals, they're 7-4. They're only a half a game back of the second best record in the AFC. They have the second best record in the AFC North behind the Baltimore Ravens, and he's been a big reason why. The emergence of the run game, obviously combined with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, but Joe Mixon has been sensational, and he was the story for the Cincinnati Bengals yesterday. Fantastic, fantastic performance. So on Thanksgiving Day, there's always a football game. This time it was Dallas and the Las Vegas Raiders. And according to CBS, well, actually, I shouldn't say according to CBS, but it was stated by CBS. Again, this was a game that the Cowboys lost to the Raiders 36-33 in overtime. CBS said that this game was the most watched NFL regular season game on any network since 1990. It drew 38.5 million viewers on Thanksgiving Day. That is phenomenal. And football is obviously a staple of American culture, and especially of that day when you think of Thanksgiving, whether you're watching professional football, whether you're playing with your friends and family in the backyard in a little turkey bowl game, Thanksgiving and football are synonymous. And that's an incredible number, regardless of your disposition towards the sport, regardless of your fanfare, whether you like the teams or not. It's always playing in the background. Dallas and Raiders drew 38.5 million views. That's sensational. Speaking of sensational, the Iowa State Cyclones running back, Breece Hall, broke the college football record for the most consecutive games with a rushing touchdown. He's now rushed for at least one touchdown in 24 straight games. An incredible mark. It's the second straight season in which in every single game he has scored at least one rushing touchdown. Breece Hall was extremely emotional about it. The last time he didn't rush for a touchdown was against Notre Dame his freshman year 2 years ago in 2019. That was the last time he didn't rush for, and that was the season finale. And he's having another phenomenal year, 1,472 rushing yards. Cyclones, they made some noise at different parts of the year. They're 7-5. They actually handed Oklahoma State their only loss of the season, and he was a big reason why. Major shout out to Breece Hall. Transitioning to the NHL, Alex Ovechkin recorded his 28th career hat trick over the weekend. This guy just continues to mesmerize us all. He's already fourth in the NHL's all-time scoring list. He has 749 goals, and he'll probably move into number 3 by the end of the year. And right now, first of all, he scored 2 of his 3 goals in 56 seconds in a 4-3 win over the Florida Panthers. But this is the impressive thing. So he's got 18 goals this year, which is the most through 21 games in a season by a player in at least his 17th season. This is his 17th season after all. And again, he's only 19 goals from passing Jeremy Yeager for third on the career all-time list following the hat trick. It was his 153rd multi-goal game of his career. Again, he's already fourth on the all-time list. He moved into 26th place in the NHL's all-time career points list, and the Capitals are having another great year. This is an NHL team that has the best record in the NHL with 14-3. And he continues to amaze even at this stage of his career. And along with him, Steph Curry continues to amaze at this stage of his career. Steph Curry makes Malkin's moments this week. Over the weekend, he got his 220th career 30-point game. That's the third most in Warriors history behind Wilt Chamberlain and Rick Barry. He already has 8 30-point games this year for the Warriors. He's the leading front runner for league MVP. And he just became the fastest player in NBA history to make 100 3-pointers on a season. He broke his own record. It took him only 19 games this year to make 100 3-pointers. That's jaw-dropping numbers. And again, 19 games, that's it. It's unbelievable. Final 2 Malkin's moments. The Pittsburgh quarterback, Kenny Pickett. What a season he's had for the Panthers, who are ranked number 17, right now, 10-2 on the year. They've had major wins over Clemson, Virginia, and they got another opportunity coming up against Wake Forest. But he just passed Dan Marino's record, Dan Marino's school record for the most passing touchdowns in a single season. He passed for his 39th and now 40 touchdowns on the season, which passes Dan Marino's record that's been held for 40 years. And this guy, Kenny Pickett, on the year has 4,066 passing yards. That's 5th most in college football. His 40 touchdowns on the season are tied for the 2nd most in the sport. Only 7 interceptions on 68% completion. It's amazing. They also beat Clemson as well, as I mentioned. He's having a sensational year. And then finally, my last Malkin's moment goes to Hassan Haskins and the Michigan Wolverines. The Michigan running back rushed for 169 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns, which ties a school record set in 1968. Michigan, of course, pulled off a huge 42-27 upset over Ohio State. Sensational performance. He's rushed for over 150 yards in 3 of his last 4 games. It's the 6th time this year that he's topped 100 rushing yards, and Michigan is primed to make the college football playoff. They just got to beat Iowa. We'll see what type of game that he ends up having in that one. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for joining me on Morning Joe right here every Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Mondays and Wednesdays. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe with Jonah Malkin. Follow me on Twitter at morning_Joe_ at Jonah Malkin, Twitter, Instagram, jmalkin97, TikTok, Jonah Malkin. Like, subscribe, comment, and as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.